So thank you for joining this session in relation to exporting honey to the EU. My name is Chris Downs, Policy and Law Lead Expert, Sustainable Agri-Food Systems at CoLead, and I'm joined by my colleague Ingrid Morvan, who is EU Policy and Regulations Expert with a specialist interest in animal products. So thank you for joining. So this will be recorded, and you will receive the recording after the session, and also the presentation slides will be distributed after the session. So perhaps just to start with a little bit of context about AgriInfo. So this webinar is taking place in the context of the AgriInfo program, and the AgriInfo program is an EU-funded program. And the whole idea is really to help developing countries to export agricultural products to the EU, and in particular to help them understand the EU regulatory environment. Now, we have 142 partners in the program. These are all low and middle income countries. The program started in 2022, and it will be running for 5 years, and we very much hope that it will be extended in the future. And this is really, excuse me, this is really just in relation to agricultural products. We don't cover in the scope of our program industrial products. This is simply agri-food products. The program is implemented by CoLead. So CoLead is a Brussels-based not-for-profit private sector organization. And we run a number of development programs in the agriculture and food sector. Now, historically, we have been working primarily with ACP countries, but this program, AgriInfo, is extended, in fact, to all regions of the world. We have a website where all information is provided, but I'll come back a little bit later to the AgriInfo service and some of the information that we provide. So why do a workshop today on honey? So when we talk to our partners, we understand that there is considerable interest, particularly from some countries that are not today exporting honey to the EU. There's an interest in doing so, but it's quite difficult as an exporter to have a good understanding of what precisely the EU requires. And also, there have been a number of changes to the rules, and keeping track of those changes is really quite difficult. And we recognize that, and that was the thinking both behind a guidance that we have developed, and I'll come back to that later, but also this particular webinar. So I just want to start. I will provide a bit of background context to why is the EU changing the rules on honey. We'll talk about some of the major requirements, really focusing on those new rules and what is changing in the regulatory environment. And then a little bit of information on what is upcoming, what is likely to change in the future, and how to help you really follow what is changing. So to start with the context. So the EU consumes around 360,000 tons of honey. We import around 175,000 tons and export 30,000 tons. With the second largest honey importer as the EU, representing around 30% of global imports. Most of the honey that is sold to the EU consumer consists of blends of honey from different origins. And most of the honey that is imported is in fact blended before it reaches the EU consumer. There is EU production of honey, and that accounts for around 60% of European honey needs, which means that we import 40% of honey that is used in the EU. Which countries do we largely import from? Well, China is the biggest, as you see here on the graph. China is the biggest exporter to the EU, followed by Ukraine and Argentina. But what is noticeable is there are a lot of currently smaller exporting countries, a whole list of countries that are already on the market and are quite probably looking to expand their share of the European market. Just briefly, which EU member states are importing. The majority of EU member states, just a couple that don't import honey, but the largest importers are the Netherlands, Italy, Spain, Germany, and France. But as you can see, there are the majority of countries, the majority of EU member states are importing honey. So why are the EU changing the rules? And this is the question that we receive fairly often. Well, for some time, really from 2016, there has been concern, particularly from consumers' organizations, that the quality of honey that is sold on the EU market is deteriorating. And the EU launched an investigation between 2021 and 2023. The EU launched an investigation into honey to check more closely the quality of the honey, and that implies both to EU honey and to honey imports. What it found, and this is the result of that investigation, that 46% of 320 samples on investigation were found to be not compliant with the EU rules, and there was a suspicion that there was a fraud involved with these products. And we're talking mainly about the addition of syrups to honey and sometimes the mislabeling of the origin of that honey. And as a result of this investigation, the EU concluded that there was a need to look again at EU laws to increase controls of honey at EU borders, reinforce the existing rules, and to get exporting countries to be more vigilant in regard to the honey that is coming to the EU. So just to give you an idea of the findings, that these are the findings of the investigation, and here on the graph you see that the number of operators. In green, those are the operators that were found to be compliant with the EU honey directive. We'll come back later to what the EU honey directive is. And then in pink, the number of operators that were non-compliant with the EU. And as you can see, there are a large number of countries in which there are operators that were found to be non-compliant. So turning to the rules themselves and how the EU has looked to address the problem of suspected fraud, adulteration, and non-compliance. Now, the first requirement is that if you want to export honey, and this is not a new requirement, this has been in place for some time. If you want to export honey to the EU, the country in which you're operating must be listed to export honey. Now, the idea, so you will appreciate that the EU has strict rules on all food products, but when it comes to animal products, and animal products meaning meat and dairy and eggs and fish, the EU wants greater guarantees that the systems that are in place, the food safety, the food quality systems that are in place in other countries, exporting countries, are equivalent to the standards that we establish in the EU. And this means that in different areas, it is necessary for the EU, for the exporting country to demonstrate this, and they will then be authorized and approved and what we call listed to export to the EU. Now, for most animal products, there are 4 areas in which this must occur in relation to animal health, food safety, residue control plans, which we'll come back to, and
ايه دوست في اليوتيوب متوسط فعلي عندي فعل اللي دخل قد ايه ما انا حسبتها
Sorry,
متوسط مثلا
if you don't
600 جيجا.
mind muting, sorry, I think somebody's not muted. Thank you. Um, and the management of antimicrobial medicines. Now, in the case of honey, which is relatively good news if you're exporting honey, there are only two requirements. A country must be listed in relation to residue control plans, and from September 2026, in relation to the management of antimicrobial medicines. What does it mean? Uh, a residue control plan. So basically, the EU wants to know that in the country of exports, there are systems in place for checking, controlling the presence of pesticides, the presence of contaminants, and veterinary medicines. And so if a country wishes to be listed, approved, and listed in the EU, they have to send a control plan, a draft control plan to the European Commission and say, this is what we are doing in our country. Now, there's not, in the case of EU member states, they are told by the Commission what should be in these plans. In the case of exporting countries, because the situation in each exporting country is slightly different, that is, you may be using different pesticides, there may be different problems in relation to contaminants. It is up to the country itself to determine what goes into that plan. And it's a risk-based plan. So, you have to determine your own risks and then put together a plan. And that plan is presented to the European Commission. And the European Commission will study that plan, ask questions, get clarifications. And then if the Commission approves the plan, the country is listed on the annex of Regulation 2021/405. And once you're listed, that means that a country is approved to export honey. Now, this list is updated typically once or twice a year. So it's not the case that you can just produce a control plan and then the next month you get onto the list. There is an administrative process as well, and it does take some time. In addition to that, if you want to stay on the list every year, a revised, updated residue control plan must be sent to the Commission before 31st of March um, every year. And that's because risks change over time. And so it's up to the country to reflect on changing risks and to come up with a new plan. And in that way, countries can stay listed. Of course, if a country doesn't follow that and doesn't come up with a new plan or a revised plan, there may be a risk in the longer term that they are delisted, removed from the list, and then they will not be able to export. So just to emphasize, we did do a session yesterday, and there was some confusion about this. Is a residue control plan for a company or an exporter? No, this is really the responsibility of the competent authorities in the exporting country. So they are the ones that most approach the Commission with a proposed control plan, and so it's not the operators who have this responsibility. So if we look at today, and we just focused on low and middle income countries, because those are the partners in the program that we're working on. These are the partner countries that today are authorized to export honey to the EU. So if you are joining us from a country that is not on that list, then the first step is really to engage with competent authorities with a view to seeing if the country can take the necessary steps to be added to this list. If you want further information about what that involves, there's some links here which point you towards guidelines and a model of the control plan that needs to be submitted. So the second requirement, so once a country is approved, and this is a new requirement, and it's a requirement that comes into force on Friday of this week. And this is that only individual established honey establishments, honey producers can export honey. So you need to be approved. Not just the country needs to be approved, but the exporter also has to be approved. What does the EU consider an establishment? It is in a unit within the honey business where the honey is being produced. So if you are a honey producer with various honey producing units, then essentially each of those units would be considered an establishment, and therefore each establishment has to be approved. This does not mean that the honey producers themselves, the primary producers, need to be listed. And if you are a business and you're simply storing the honey or transporting the honey, there is no obligation to be on the list of approved establishments. So again, this is something that is done by your competent authority in your country. But in order to be listed, a company needs to demonstrate that they can meet standards equivalent to EU requirements. So this is in relation to hygiene and into general food law. So the actual process of listing is not a complicated one administratively, but it does require competent authorities to do the necessary checks that you can meet these requirements. Now, just to give an example in relation to hygiene, in particular, what are the competent authorities looking at? They want to see that a honey establishment has a control system based on HACCP, has an analysis critical control points. They want to see that the honey is handled and prepared and packed and stored in hygienic in a hygienic manner, and that the honey meets the general hygiene requirements in relation to production and in relation to all other steps of processing. And the specific detail of what is required, that can be found in the EU hygiene regulation in the particular articles and annexes that are mentioned there. So where are we today? And this is a little bit of a concern both for us as a program and for the European Commission as well, that there are a number of countries in which currently no establishments have been listed. So on the left, you will see the number. This is data from this weekend, and you will see that there are a number of countries for which establishments. The figure is the number of establishments in each country that have been listed. But among AGRINFO partner countries, these are countries that are approved to export honey. What we see is that there are no establishments listed as of this weekend or last weekend, and that means that these countries, because there are no establishments listed, will not be able to export honey as of Friday, unless the approved establishments are signalled to the Commission. Now, this is a process that takes place through the traces mechanism. It is relatively easy, as I said, for competent authorities to be. You can very quite quickly update the list of establishments, but of course it does require the necessary controls to have already taken place. A third requirement, and again, this is new, and it's new from it has been in place since the 3rd of September of this year. There is a new type of model certificate required for export of honey. So the requirement for a certificate is not new. Each consignment of honey that is sent to the EU must be accompanied by a certificate, and that certificate is signed by the competent authority. And in signing it, they are making sure, checking that the honey complies with EU general food law, food safety hygiene requirements. They make sure that the country itself is listed for a residue control plan. and that the honey is compliant with other EU requirements, which we will discuss a little later. These certificates can be in paper form or they can be electronic. The electronic system is the one that I referred to earlier in relation to the updating of establishment, the traces, EU electronic traces system. Um, and if in electronic form, then the certificate must be delivered through the traces system. So, as I said, since 3 September, the updated model of the honey certificate must be used. Why is it an updated certificate? They have added a statement, an attestation into the certificate that is related to antimicrobial medicines. And basically, this statement says that the honey was produced in accordance with the requirements related to antimicrobial medicines, which I'll come back to in a second. Now, those new rules on antimicrobial medicines only apply from 2026, 3rd of September 2026, but nevertheless, from 3rd of September um, from this year, the new model had to be used, and this is a little bit odd, perhaps, but the on the paper version, the antimicrobial attestation must be there, but it must be crossed out at least until the 3rd of September 2026. Now, if you're using an electronic certificate via traces, then the antimicrobial attestation is automatically crossed out. So that is uh, that's not a problem. But if you're using the paper certificate, then you must use the updated certificate, but it must be crossed out when it is signed by the veterinarian. Where do you find the updated model? Um, so the link is here. It's Regulation 2020-2235. And then when you go to that site, make sure that you click on the current consolidated version, and that will take you to the document which includes the certificate, which is the right model certificate, chapter 45 of the annex of that regulation. So then just to explain a little bit more what is meant by antimicrobials. So as indicated from 3rd of September 2026, we talked about listing and the need to be listed in relation to residue control plans. Countries must also be listed to demonstrate that they are successfully managing antimicrobial medicines. Now, this is an initiative. In the EU, there is a lot of concern about resistance to antibiotics. And within that context, the EU has developed specific rules in relation to antibiotics used in animals. And there is a prohibition of using antibiotics to promote growth and increase yield. And this is more relevant to honey and bees. It is not allowed to use antibiotics in animals that are reserved for the treatment of specific infections in humans. Now, these rules are rules that apply to imports of all animal products and cover the whole life of the animal. So if the animal has a long, even if these rules come in 2026, if the animals have a long life, then it's already relevant to be thinking about this already today. Exporting countries then must put in place systems to ensure that these antimicrobials will not be used, and they have to guarantee to the EU that this is the case. So this is quite similar to what we saw in the case of the residue plans. An exporting country will provide those guarantees, explain to the Commission what it's done, and submit a declaration that they are conforming with these rules. The European Commission will then look into that, ask relevant questions, and if the European Commission approves the declaration, then the country is listed in Regulation 2024-2598. Again, as in the case of the residue plans, this is not a responsibility for operators. This is a responsibility for national competent authorities. So what is the state of play in November? So already, and remember that this only comes into force in 2026, a number of countries are already approved and already listed, and these are the countries listed on the left. But what we also see is that there are a number of countries that have not yet taken the necessary steps to be approved and listed. And so if you are operating in one of those countries, certainly this is again something to follow up with your competent authorities. Finally, if you're exporting honey to the EU, then of course you must comply with all EU food safety and honey standards. And now here provide a general overview um, and uh, of what this entails, but at a number of points in the presentation, we referred to the Honey Directive, which is Directive 2001/110. And this is particularly relevant to exports of honey because it sets out the labeling rules and the composition rules for honey. So if you're exporting honey, it's essential that the honey complies with these rules. So labeling describes the names and defines the names that can be used on the honey. And then composition sets out details of the content of sucrose, fructose, glucose, etc. And if we look here in the next slide, so this is provides in some detail the various composition criteria. This is just an excerpt of those. So those composition criteria can be found in Council Directive 2001/110, the so-called Honey Directive, but they're also reproduced in the guide that we have developed in the annex to the guide, and that guide, and in fact all the information that you've seen today can be found in that guidance document, which is available on our website at the link in this slide. So there are specific changes to these rules that we just wanted to highlight to give you a complete picture. From June 2026, there are some changes to the Honey Directive, and these are probably going to have more impact on importers than exporters. But there's specifically, and this is in response to concerns about labeling and EU consumers not having a clear picture of where honey comes from, the origin labeling rules have changed. And under the new revised EU honey directive, all the countries of origin where the honey has been harvested must be indicated on the label. And that includes the percentage of honey from each country listed from the largest to smallest in terms of share in weight. There is a margin of tolerance foreseen in relation to blends. And in terms of smaller packs, when they're small packs of honey, there are exceptions. You don't have to put the country name. The country name can be replaced by a country code rather than having to put the full name. There's also a technical change in relation to the term filtered honey, which is completely removed. It's currently in the Honey Directive, but it is removed, and its definition is incorporated into the definition of baker's honey. So that is really an overview of the main requirements and the main changes to requirements. Just a few things to watch out for if you're exporting honey. Remote audits are undertaken. So all exporting country residue control plans are assessed by the EU at least once every 5 years. And this is through questionnaires, um, largely through questionnaires that are sent to the exporting countries related to the procedures and controls that they have in place. The current 5 year cycle ends in 2025. So if your specific country has not yet been assessed, you should expect audits by the end of 2025. And these audits are significant in the sense that if they don't go well, if the Commission identifies problems, that can lead to increased checks of honey at the EU border. And again, if things do not go well, this can potentially lead to the suspension of imports. So these remote audits are things that need to be taken extremely seriously by exporting countries. There is another innovation. The EU has set up a EU honey platform, which I believe just met for the first time fairly recently. And the idea is really to bring together experts, so representatives of EU countries, EU member states, competent authorities, um, designated laboratories, stakeholders in the honey supply chain, academic experts. And really, this is the group that is reflecting on um, how how the current rules are working, and if there is need for further changes to EU rules. And particularly, they are looking at the methods used for identifying adulterated honey. They're looking at traceability systems, and will probably make recommendations on that. And potentially, this may lead to a change in the composition and quality criteria that are included in the EU honey directive. How do you keep track of all that's going on? Uh, I can only encourage you to follow the work that we're doing. So we have a website, as I mentioned previously. We also have we send out regular updates. And this is not just on honey, of course, but on all changes to EU food law. And it's free to subscribe to that. And if you do, you will receive every 2 weeks the latest information on upcoming. So we do try and anticipate the changes that are going to be made and recent changes to EU laws. The website itself includes further information in relation to honey. So not just the topics that we've covered today, but also topics that we haven't, because they're too large, we haven't been able to include in today's presentation. So, for example, in relation to the organic regulation, or in trade or customs issues, the aim of the site is really to cover basically all the rules that affect the export of honey and other agri-food products. This has just been an introduction, and I haven't been following the chat, but I suspect on the basis of yesterday's discussions that you may have very specific questions. Now, we will have a question and answer session, and we'll try to respond to your questions. Having said that, if you have a very specific question, we prefer to take our time and look into detail into the question to make sure that we're giving you the right information. So please do not hesitate to contact us, and this can be directly via the email address, or if you prefer, you can also go to the site. We have an Ask AgriInfo section on our site. You just fill in your name and your inquiry, and then we will do our best to get back to you promptly with the information that you are looking for. So thank you very much for your patience. And as I said, we'll have a question and answer session. Perhaps Ingrid has already received questions, but otherwise we can open the floor also and hear your comments and questions. Thank you very much.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for the insightful presentation. I'm Alaء Al from Egypt. I work as a market intelligence and the food expert council. I wanted to ask some questions, but the important one regarding lifting the ban on honey exports to the EU. Just I wanted to know what are the procedures needed Egypt to lift the ban on exporting honey to the EU markets.
So you refer to a ban. Ingrid, you may be more familiar with the specific context of Egypt and the export of honey. It, it is when you talk to a ban, is it that Egyptian establishments are not? Perhaps Ingrid, are you more aware of the specific Egypt context?
I, th- I think EU supports the ban on all the products from the origin of plants or animals, and I think honey. So I
Good
wanted
morning.
to know where the lifting the ban on honey expert.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So as far as I can see, Egypt is not registered in the list of authorized countries to export to the EU for honey. Egypt is registered for the time being only for casings. So
Uh, it's not listed, but يعني, I wanted to know to lift the ban. We يعني, it's important to list to the left ban or
yeah, the first step should be to submit the control plan on residues to be listed in the Annex -1 of Regulation 2021/405, the first requirement that was explained today. Yeah,
okay, again to lift the ban.
So yeah, so it's not
You
so much.
wanted to.
So it's not so much a ban, but in order to export honey, each country needs to be approved and listed. Now, as Ingrid is explaining, Egypt today is not approved to export honey. Why? Because in order to export honey, you need to have an approved residue control plan. This means that you have to be able to tell the EU. So when I say you, the competent authority has to explain to the EU how it is checking, controlling residues of pesticides, contaminants, and veterinary medicines in honey. Now, if Egypt takes that step, uh, and the European Commission checks that information and finds that it is sufficient, then Egypt will be put on a list, and then once individual honey exporters have also been approved and listed by the competent authorities, then Egyptian honey exporters will be able to export to the EU.
yeah, we can send
Okay, what,
documents.
Yeah, we could
okay, what I understood, we must put on the list the control of residues
yeah,
to lift the ban.
absolutely. And if you'd like to get in touch with us afterwards, we can point you to all the relevant information and to support you in that.
Okay, just I wanted to ask you to send all the procedures on the chat or on the mail to share this information in Egyptian food exporters in honey.
Certainly, we can do that. And the information is actually in the guidance. Excuse me. But if you would like to send us just a quick email, then we can make sure that you have that information.
Okay, great. Can you send the mail on the chat?
The mail is, hang on, I'll go back in the presentation. So, excuse me, if you send an email to that address, then we'll get straight back to you with the information you're referring to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Um, Okay, so otherwise there was a question regarding the potential markets of honey, but yeah, this is an economic question, and today's session is on regulatory matters.
Yeah, so just to clarify that, so what we are able to do, what we try to do as AgriInfo is provide information just on the regulations. And it's true. Sometimes people come to us with questions about the market and which export markets are particularly appropriate or should be targeted by exports. But really, that's not our area of expertise. Our area of expertise is really focused on the regulatory side. So very happy to answer questions on the regulations, but it's difficult for us to answer questions in relation to the market itself.
So otherwise, there is a question regarding Kenya. So yeah, how come Kenya is not included in any of the list? So the answer of this is Kenya is on the list, but for aquaculture product, not for honey. So to export honey to the EU, the first step should be as well to submit the control plan and to follow the procedure to be also listed for honey.
Yeah, this is really an initiative of the competent authorities, and normally in discussion with exporters. So exporters will get into discussions with competent authorities that they need to take the necessary steps in order to be listed, so that um, um, honey exports can take place. So it sounds, for example, in the case of Kenya, that those steps have been taken in relation to fish, but it is not enough to take steps just for fish. It has to be done for each product individually, and so sometimes we get we get the question, but we're approved for, we're on this list, but it is really a animal product by animal product um, uh, approval. So even if you're approved for fish, you need to go through all the steps to be also approved for honey.
So another question is, are these regulations also applicable for supplements that contain honey?
Okay, so these are the rules regarding honey. When honey is included with other ingredients in a product, it's what we call in Europe a composite product. So a mixture of animal ingredients and non-animal ingredients, and there are specific rules for those. Now, so depending on the specific product, it will determine what those particular rules are. However, if your country is not approved for honey exports, you cannot put honey in a product and export. That's a sort of a simplification. If you have specific questions about honey in products, this is a sort of very complicated area that we're very happy to help you understand. But it's probably best to get in contact then and explain precisely what the product is, and then we can look into it, because it's a very, very complex area. But basically, if you're not approved to export honey and you put honey in something else, you can't export that product, even if it's a very small quantity.
Does it answer your question? If not, please specify your question. So from Ethiopia, competent authority, we want to register an establishment, but to do the change in management of the competent authority.
Just I see in the chat that there are questions regarding emails. So if you signed up to this initially to this this session, you will automatically receive both a recording of this presentation and the slides. If you have if you haven't, if you didn't register, could we ask you actually to send us an email? And it's the link that is actually on the screen. I think you can still see the slides. It's agriinfo@colead.link. And if you send us a short email, we will make sure you will also receive all the material as well. And likewise, if you have a specific question, that is the address to send that question to. Sorry, Ingrid, you were saying.
Yeah, about the question from Ethiopia and the difficulty to log in Tracy's system. So please send us an email and we will try to be as well in contact with DG Santé and try to solve your issue. So there is also another question from South Africa. What are the risks or challenges for establishments like bottling, packing facilities, privately owned, regarding sourcing from honey producers, beekeepers? So if I understand correctly, the question, it's the question of listing the establishment. So the establishment has to follow the hygiene rules and have to have a self-control system based on HACCP system. And based on this, yeah, you need to identify the critical points and to have a correcting system of the critical points. Also retesting honey. Can you please take the floor and explain in more details your question, please?
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, my name is Mike. I'm South Africa. So we have a bottling facility in South Africa. So obviously we have to, like I said, if and when we are not listed yet, but if and when we are listed, I know the EU are trying to help South Africa to do this. So when this happens, obviously we're trying to position ourselves as you call it, an establishment, a bottling facility to facilitate the export of honey. I know all this honey would be tested and verified and approved by a testing facility, and then only it can be exported. I just wanted to find out from you just what would be things that we would look out for as the packing facilities, recommendations on the right procedure to avoid us being rejected or a specific batch being rejected. Things that the EU would definitely not allow into the country, into the EU.
So I think the answer really lies in this slide, which is a bit daunting. But there are various things that you have to be looking out for, which are contaminants and pesticide residues and veterinary medicine residues, and really testing the honey in respect of these particular regulations and and looking for the potential presence of this. They just emphasize that. So if South Africa is if the residue plan is adopted and the EU approves South Africa, that is a recognition that South Africa has the controls in place. But there's still obviously the obligation of the individual exporter to comply with all the EU rules. So a first step is very much to be familiarizing yourself, with these specific areas of law. And in the guidance, we do try and give an overview of the rules that are the most relevant in that respect. So I don't know if that's too oblique as an answer.
No, it's great. I'll obviously go on the website and try.
I think the starting point is if you look at the guidance and the link to the guidance is here. But I mean, perhaps Ingrid, if you put also the link to the guidance in the in the chat, that would be helpful. And then, Michael, if you have any specific questions after that, we'll be very happy to follow up.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So that is the link there to the site. But if you go to the site and you look up on publications, you will find the honey document. Does anybody else wish to take the floor? Ingrid, are there other questions in the chat?
No, I'm checking, but I don't see any other questions. Except one again on EU market, the preferred types of honey in EU market. But this is not the point of the.
Well, this again, that's more of a market issue, which is really difficult for us to answer. Yeah. If there are no further questions, then we're finishing a little bit early. I hope that means that this was relatively clear, rather than you are now all desperate about the idea of exporting honey into the EU. But let's see that as positive. But just seriously, if there is a need to follow up on any specific points, or if you have questions on other areas of EU food regulations, please don't be shy. Just send us through an email, and we'll see what we can do to help out. So if that's all, thank you very much indeed for joining us. You will be receiving the presentation, you will be receiving the recording, and I look forward to being in touch with you. Thank you very much.